Hello again everyone and welcome to another tutorial, and this is going to be a fun one because today we start painting the lion. So I just wanted to show you the sub-assemblies I have. So I pretty much have the whole thing built, and the things that are separate are the cloak because it's rather huge, and you have to have the backpack separate to put the cloak on, otherwise I would have the backpack on the model. But yeah, what I'll be doing is painting this and gluing it on in the backpack after. Why did I glue the sword on? Well, basically what I found was the join between the wrists wasn't fantastic, and I really didn't want to sort of fill it with putty or not get a perfect fit after painting it. So I've decided to glue it on, and I did have to use putty to get that to work. Some people might be worried about accessibility, but I kind of tried it and I thought, do you know what? I can get a brush in there and I can go in under there. I'd rather work around this than have to mess around with building that later. So what I'm going to be doing is painting the sword first. And that means basically we can get this part that sticks out done, and then I'll work my way from the top down, and that means I won't manhandle things and ruin it, and that means it's absolutely fine to paint all in one. I've also got the base that I've built, so I used this part that came with it and just added a little bit of Milliput. If you aren't sure how to do this, then check out my Necron tutorial, and I basically use some putty to make some basing. So it's very simple. I might add some ammo casings, maybe some more skulls, but I found this base such a mess. I really don't like these marines with all the bullet holes in. I think it just looks horrible to paint. So I'm going for a nice clean and simple base, and we'll make it just about the miniature. Okay, so part one of painting the lion, and confession time, this is the second time I've tried recording this video because I tried painting the sword, which is what I'm going to do in this tutorial, and I was really unhappy with how it turned out, and that was with true metallic metals. So I am going back to non-metallic metal, which I think is my preference. But I'm going to go check the footage and see if I can show you what I was doing with the true metallics. But in a nutshell, because this is a huge topic of debate, I didn't like how I couldn't control the highlights and the aesthetic. And I just found it quite frustrating because I couldn't get the look I really wanted. And after going back and looking at some references, I decided I wanted to go for the non-metallic look on the sword. And I really like this artwork on the front cover of the Lion book, and I wanted to replicate a similar look to that, and I just felt that the non-metallic aesthetic and feel would just suit what I wanted to do referencing that artwork. So anyway, maybe we'll talk about that in a whole other video. But I hope that you enjoy these tutorials in non-metallic metals. Let me know your opinion. I think it's probably more difficult, so in terms of bringing you good information, I'm happy to do that. But anyway, with the lion, what I've actually done is I've done some little tests for colours to make sure I'm happy this time, make sure I don't make those mistakes. And what we're going to be playing with is a contrast of red and blue. So the armour is going to have a slight blue tint as per the artwork, and there's going to be a lot of red from the cloth and things like that. So that's the contrast we're going to play with over the whole model. So when it comes to the sword, I want to have, obviously it's going to be a silver non-metallic metal, but we're going to have some slight red in the shadows and slightly blue in the highlights. And this will enhance and exaggerate the contrast, and it will really help towards our non-metallic metal effect. The most important thing to play with on the sword is the difference between this is going to be the shadow side and this is going to be the light side. And you can see where my lights above my head are catching all of this and this little groove in here. And it's actually the comparison between these two sides that will help sell the non-metallic metal effect more than the contrast going along the blade. So often we see that light dark effect, and that can look cool, but for me what's more important is the interaction between these two sides. And that's because of the sharp change in angle along the center there. So the left and the right is going to be the shadow and the light. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you through the palette, and I'm going to mix up all the colours, and then we'll start painting this awesome sword. Even though I love the artwork for the lion, I thought the sword reference was a little bit uninteresting as it was just some neutral greys. I did, however, find a really cool reference, and I think it's for Warhammer Online for a High Elf sword. And what I really liked about it was the play of these slightly red shadows and the blue lights. And that obviously works really nicely in what I said was going to be our overall colour scheme. I tested out some colours, and the ones on the screen now are the ones I decided to go for. So basically the shadows are going to be a mix of a dark grey, I've got petroleum grey here, and I've got a crimson. So not a pure red, but this will work really nicely replicating the colour in the reference. Then the highlights are mostly going to come from this dark blue grey by AK. I really like this. You know, this is more generic. Any kind of bluish grey will work. And ivory is always a reliable colour for highlights with that kind of warmish glow. And then the last colour is going to be some Vallejo Ultramarine. This I used sparingly just to slightly add a little more blue into our highlights. So this is just for tone. So basically the main recipe is just a dark grey, a medium grey, and then an off-white. And then what we have is two colours that are very contrasting that we use just for tone. And this is a really nice way to kind of come up with any recipe for non-metallic metal. We obviously have the value contrast created by our dark, middle and light. And then you have two colours which are very strong opposites, which will enhance any contrast. What I'm going to do now is put them all on the palette, and I'm going to mix up all the tones we're likely to use. Then when I refer back to them, it will be a bit simpler as I go along the recipe. So the base colour is going to be obviously dark, and it's going to be a grey with a little bit of red. So I take my petroleum grey here, or my dark grey, and I'm going to just add a little bit of crimson to it. And I'm going to use my eye here to judge if I want to make it a little redder, and I think I do. And that looks about right to me. Now I'm going to make this colour twice, or an approximation. Just got another blob of grey here to add back in. And then now what I need to do is take my blue grey, and I'm going to mix a little of that in here. And that will be, I can use this colour for the transition and also a highlight for the shadow side. So it's kind of a reddish grey. It's quite desaturated because of the two greys we've got in there, and we're just adding a little bit of red for tone, but making sure it doesn't get too red. Then what I need is probably another intermediary tone. So I'll just take a little of that and add some more grey. Take some of that base. There we go. So I don't know if I will use all of these tones. I probably will, but I'm basically going to mix up anything I'm likely to need now, and then I can just pick and use the tones I want. So the next tone is going to be a lighter one, and I'm going to add a little of this ultramarine blue. You can see how powerful it is, so we only want a small amount. Just to slightly enhance that blue. And then take some ivory, and we'll start making some light greys. That looks nice. Then I need to make a lighter highlight. And that is the basis of my transition now. I'm going to need some lighter ones, but that's just going to be keep adding ivory like this until I'm kind of happy. And I'm probably not going to use any pure ivory. It's always going to have some kind of grey and blue in it. I might use pure ivory just as a little edge kind of highlight. I'm really happy with these tones. Looking at it, I think I'm just going to add a little more blue in here. Just trying to make it look interesting. And they might not be perfect, so when I start painting I might adjust it, but I just thought it'd be useful for you to see how I can kind of mix up colours and make these kind of recipes. And I can see my transition here, and if I compare this first colour, how blue it is compared to my shadow, it's really a huge contrast, so it should look fantastic. So the first thing I do is base coat the sword with this, and yeah, then we'll get into it. So I've treated myself to brand new brushes today, and let's try and get a nice result. So I'm going to very carefully base coat the whole thing in this very dark reddish grey colour. And my brush stroke is moving up the sword, just trying to get it as smooth as possible. So with the base coat dry, or almost dry, got a few puddles here, I'll avoid those. I'm going to move on to the next grey, which is the mix of the red and the dark grey and a touch of that lovely dark blue grey from AK. So what we're going to do is paint almost all of the top half here on the highlight side with this colour, because this is going to form some transition. And then we're going to paint that little groove in there. Honestly, I need to hold that close to my face, so I make sure I paint that properly. So I'll do that off camera, but I'll just be blocking that line in. And then what we're going to do on the shadow side is we're going to basically paint some highlights. So I'm going to come in from either side, do a little highlight there, maybe another one there or something like that, and a little bit like that. So this still needs to have some kind of transition, something interesting going on at this side, but in general it's all going to be very dark. So I'm going to let that dry and then move on to the next part. So that's a very subtle start, but it's worth it. Now we're going to move on to the kind of transitional colour where it has a little more of that blue in. Now you need to decide where you want it to be shiny. So you're going to have a shiny spot here, or on the end, or on here. And that's basically where we need to work towards. It's a funny one because this is kind of the photographing angle, so it could work really low down, or it could work at the top. So I think I'm going to go for it here at the top. So what I'm going to do is just leave maybe this part dark and work on all of that being a little lighter. So I take my next grey and I'll paint all of the top. Because I know that's going to be lighter for sure. And then I need to decide where it kind of starts transitioning. So And we can go back to the other colours if we don't like the look of it. I'm thinking something like that. Leave a little bit of the shadow at the bottom. I think that'll work. What I will do is do a little bit of a reflection at the bottom. And this is where the sword changes angle just at the end. So just a little bit and a couple lines. Something like that. And again, I'm going to paint all of this part along the bottom. I'm probably going to paint all of this edge and then just see how this side looks. And then if I want to add any more light on here, then I will. But for now, I'm going to let this dry and probably add another coat of that, and then we'll see how that looks. So that's starting to come together for me. We're building up gradually, but I can see where we're heading now. You can see we've got that difference now between the shadow side and the light, and it already looks cool. We've got quite a way to go, but honestly, it's not going to take that long. We're going to start working in a smaller area now. So I'm moving on to the slightly bluer greys now. So this is the first one that has a little of that ultramarine in. And what am I going to do is work on the end first of all. So the very end is going to get all of this colour. And then this is going to be a little more streaky maybe. So I'm going to start doing some diagonal brush strokes. So the light isn't coming across like that. I want it to be kind of this angle where the transition goes. So I might do a few brush strokes like this, and then maybe blend them together later. So I'm going to see how this is when it dries, and with these next steps I'll probably add a few coats of each layer to kind of build it up and help blend it. But yeah, that looks cool. I quite like having these strokes like this. It helps it look more metallic in the end, and we can always soften those with little glazes if they look a little harsh. So this is the same colour, I'm just building it up, making it more opaque. And some strokes across like that again. So, you know, when I'm filming, I have to obviously not have my head in shot, and it's quite hard to do little tiny bits like this, which is why I need to do it off camera, because actually how I want to have it is kind of like this. So yeah, I'm trying to demonstrate as best I can, but when it comes to parts like here, I basically need to do an edge highlight, and having the model quite far away from you is tricky doing that. So yeah, sometimes I can't film everything, but I hope you can see how I'm demonstrating this. But yeah, basically what I'm going to do is edge highlight this and then come across that detail part there, and then we'll move on to the next tone. So there we go, I have just put a little edge along there, and a couple other bits. You can see it's framed it nicely now. I actually think it's a little pale, and I might end up shading this later. But let's move on the steps and see how it looks first. So moving to another grey, and this time we have a little ivory, a little ultramarines, and a little of that dark kind of grey. And now let's think about building up towards our really kind of shiny part, which I think I'm going to aim for somewhere like here. So I'm going to do a large highlight because that's where I'm going to build up the brightest part. Leave a little gap and then hit up the end. And then maybe again here. And then I'm going to leave all of this as it is for now. And if I don't like the look of it, like I said, I'll adjust it, but what I'm doing is using a couple lines to kind of help with the transition. We can do our blending, our glazing, but a couple of these is almost like building into the transition. Kind of how you would use stippling. Let's let that dry. Now I'm really starting to dig the look of this sword. The Ultramarines Blue I've never used before for non-metallic metal, but when I looked at that reference and I was really trying to work out what is that colour, and Ultramarines Blue seemed to be the one, not Ultramarines, Ultramarine seemed to be the right tone, and I'm really happy that I've kind of discovered this because I'll probably use it for silver a lot in the future. Now we're going to build up. This is going to be really bright, this is going to get another little bit of highlighting, but essentially I'm just building up this part here. I feel like this needs to be softened and glazed later, but let's work on this. So I'm just going to go and add a few more of those highlights, which is the Ultramarines with the ivory in. And now I'm starting to be really careful. There's my head getting in the way. And use my normal blending technique at this point. And if you aren't sure on the technique for this, remember we did a video on how to paint power swords, and I'll try and stick a link for that somewhere. So what I'm going to do is just build up and get these nice and bright. So I'm going to build that up a little bit and we'll come back. So I've built up these highlights, and that was just a few layers of the same colour, but I just build it up to try and get it smooth in finish and the transition too. And where I'm at on the palette is I'm up to my brightest colour I mixed, which was a little bit of grey, a little bit of ultramarines, and quite a lot of ivory at this point. So the ivory starts to bleach out and desaturate the colour, and it does help with the silvery look because we start to cover over the blues and we get those more boring greys. So I thought I'd show you building up that last highlight, and we'll see if we've got our desired effect. So I need to let that dry before I add another layer. So I can add some to this top part. So normally I add a layer and it's not opaque enough and it's too blotchy, so I need to let it dry and then return to it. So I'll try and hold it still now, but it's pretty damn close to me, so I should be able to paint it nicely, but it's hard to keep it still. And I'm just building up the bright highlight here. And it will appear almost white, but it still has a little bit of blue in. It's ivory mixed with blue, so we know we've not gone anywhere near pure white. And I think that's probably the best answer for non-metallic metal silver. You can use pure white, I have in the past, but I think if you can get enough contrast by using an off-white, it'll just have more colour in and it will look nicer on the eye. So I'm going to edge highlight this as well, and I can use the side of the brush. This helps to frame everything, and you can have a better judgment call to see if you've done a nice job, basically. And I'm still building up this main highlight, so it's more opaque and nice and bright. Okay, I need to let that dry again, really. Almost there on the top. I think to finish I'm just going to be adjusting this part. So I quite like where I'm at. What I'm not digging is this kind of 1, 2, 3 look, all the same. So I'm going to go back to one of my previous greys and just soften and darken one of these. So we're into kind of adjusting now. So I've just darkened one and then I'm going to brighten the other. Do I want to darken this one too and then just focus on that? Maybe, let's try. And then now I'm going to broaden up this one here. I didn't like it because there was 3 highlights all the same width. I think it's important that they have variety in intensity and the volume. I think if you have them all that similar size, then it just looks uninteresting and a bit old school, to be honest. So now this looks cooler because I have quite a big main broad highlight. And these kind of secondary, tertiary highlights that are a little darker. And I can dilute the paint a little more as well, just to help blend this in. I can always re-highlight these end parts if I want them back. But yeah, I'm preferring that. And I'm going to build that up brighter, so I'm going to add a little more ivory and see how that feels. Now this main one appears way more intense because we darken the ones either side it. And where we went over it with the blue, it's a very nice tone. I'm going to make a brighter highlight here, and then I think I'm going to fix this part too. So I'm just going to do another little highlight like this with some ivory. And yeah, I think I might mix a fresh colour and just take some ivory and add a tiny bit of ultramarine to it and just finish up with a little bit of a highlight. So I'm definitely happy with how this looks, and when I look back from the model, it's got a really nice focus on the kind of shiny part of the sword. I'm going to go back to the darker redder colours and I'm going to glaze these lines in because they're just a little bit stark. So I'm just taking the kind of base greys we had. So this is the second one, or the first kind of highlight we used. And make sure it's not too much on my brush. And move towards the shadow with the brush stroke. And just soften up these lines. I think I'm going to have to go back and forth with some of the other colours to kind of fix this little blend, but yeah, it looks pretty cool. So I'm just going back to some of my previous layers, and I've got them all mixed on the palette, just trying to blend this in. Some of these paints have got a little thick as they're drying, so I'm going to add a touch more water to them, I think. But that's feeling almost blended in nicely now. I don't want it too blended because it will become actually quite sterile looking. You want some sudden, sharp kind of highlights. I think that always looks cool. those lines I had before were just a little too stark, so just adding them in again, but a little softer this time. Something like that. I think that works now. And I need to finish with a nice strong edge highlight there. So, upon reflection, no pun intended, I think I need to have some more information going down here. I wanted it in general to get darker and slightly more reddish towards the bottom, but I haven't got enough going on here, and I think it's a little too dark. And I also need some more going on this side, so I'm going to make some adjustments. This looks fine, to be honest, but yeah, I think it ended up being a bit too dark in comparison to that. I have actually added these since as an experiment, and I'm going to show you how I did those. So previously my mixes were with these three colours. The base was the crimson with the petroleum grey, and then I added a little of the blue grey to build up the highlights. I'm going to use that same mix to highlight the bottom half of the light side, but on the other side I'm going to introduce a new colour, and that's going to be some graphite. And the reason I'm going to use that is because it's a neutral grey. So when I add the blue grey to this mix, obviously it makes it cooler. It's a very desaturated colour because these are all mixed in together, but it does start to go towards that blue. And I want to keep it, you know, no blue on the dark side. So basically I'll start with my mix of these two, and then I'll start to add in some graphite. And that means it will be less blue and we'll keep that kind of reddish tint on the one side. I just want to put some more highlights on it, and that's why I'm using this paint. So you can see my original base tone that I used, and then the first highlight for the light side. And then as we add more of the blue grey, you can see this turns quite blue. Now using the graphite, you can see it's very neutral in comparison to that blue grey. In fact, next to that, this looks very blue indeed. And you can see I've made sort of three highlight colours here, and they have kept with a little bit of the pink in. Basically you use your crimson and your other dark grey to control how vibrant the red tone is. So if I want to add a little more of the red tone, I just add a little. That will exaggerate that red tint we're going for. And this is up to you how far you push this kind of colour. And as we add more pure graphite, obviously it becomes more neutral and more grey. Now that's probably as light as I want to go, and so I think these are all the colours I'll need to finish this. So I'm going to start by adding some more highlights on this lower part of the blade. Just needs more going on here. I think it's just a little bit boring and not enough. And I'm going to use some of these strokes in this direction. And we can do the same thing on the other side essentially. So just create some more information, more things going on, and also lighten up this side in general. It just ended up being a little bit dark. Actually, it was a cool effect, but yeah, just maybe a bit too full on. I'm going to go through those previous mixes that I showed you how to make and just highlight in exactly the same way we did before until I'm happy with how it's starting to look. So this is where I've ended up. You can see we still have that really strong contrast between the light and the dark side. Just got a little bit more going on here, subtly. I could probably do some more, but you know, I don't want to spend forever on this sword. You probably want to see me paint the rest. But definitely preferring the look of this side now. It's got more going on. And actually, it's probably enhanced the NMM look because it has more colour going on here. And always a good rule with non-metallic metal is if you have some kind of reflection of colour, it helps to sell your effect because it tells the person that it is reflective if you're simulating it with these other colours. So yeah, I think that is me done on the sword. I really just wanted to show you me do those big adjustments, and you can see I've started base coating the gold, and that's going to be the next video, get that gold done, and then we can move on to probably some easier stuff, I guess, with the black armor. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm really happy with the look of this sword, and I don't get that very often. I don't get that happy with things, as I'm sure we can all relate to, but this, I feel like I've tried some new stuff, or maybe not particularly new, but I've solidified some things that I've been practicing for a long time, and I'm getting closer towards being happy with my silver non-metallic metal. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and looking forward to the gold.